the idea for the Sunshine Man came to me really as a bolt from the blue, because after the Lamplighters, I wrote a completely different book for 3 years that I couldn't get to work. And I wrote it 4 different ways. I wrote over 1 million words, and I had to accept after 3 years. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, Jake. It's horrible. I had to accept after 3 years it just didn't like me, and I couldn't find a way to make it work. So for the first time in my life, I dusted the book off, I put it in a drawer, and it's still there to this day. And I thought at the time, oh, I'll never write again. You know, you have all these sort of terrible thoughts about being a failure and whatnot. And in the same week that I took that brave decision to shelve that book, the first line of The Sunshine Man just dropped into my mind from nowhere. Never happened to me before, really weird. And the first line of the book is, "The week I shot a man clean through the head began like any other." And it just came whole. And I knew who was speaking, and I knew who she was talking about. Um, and I just went for it. And it was like this slightly reckless momentum of having ditched a whole book and ditched 3 years of graft. I had nothing to lose. And I just dived into it. And I thought, if this doesn't go anywhere, fine, I'll ditch it. Like, I've ditched the whole book. So it was this incredible momentum that just pushed me through. And Birdie Keller is the embodiment, I suppose, of that momentum and that sense of vengeance. And she's wanting to get revenge against this man. And I think I was wanting to get revenge against the other book that didn't work. So together, we just powered through the plot. So Birdie is a married mother of two, an ordinary wife and mother. She wakes up on a cold January morning in 1989 to hear that Jimmy Maguire, the man who killed her sister 18 years ago, has been freed from jail. And as far as Birdie's concerned, justice has not been done. The justice of the courts is not enough. So she puts a gun in her handbag. She says goodbye to her children and her husband, and she boards a coach to London, where she meets Jimmy coming out of Wandsworth prison. He doesn't see her. She watches him. And from there, she hunts him down to the south coast of England, where their paths will meet again. But there are two sides, Jake, to every story. And when we get Jimmy's perspective coming in, the reader's expectations of who this villain is start to become a little bit foggy and complicated. And we start to wonder, who in this scenario should we trust? I think because in The Sunshine Man, we have memories of the same event, but they have been seen and then processed very differently between the two characters. So I needed to keep an eye very closely on timeline in this novel. So I did have Birdie's timeline and Jimmy's timeline and where they intersected, but not in a great deal of detail, quite rough. I don't tend to plan hugely. I'm not a big planner. I find that if I plan my novels to the letter, I'm bored before I start writing. I want to find out what's going to happen as much as the reader does. I'm excited to sort of chase it down. So I did have to be careful with my timeline. So I did plot that element. But other than that, because the novel sort of flip-flops between the perspectives, we have Birdie's section in part one, then Jimmy's, then Birdie's, then Jimmy's, then together. So it's quite a sort of simple structure in that way. It's just all of where everything crosses over, it starts to get complicated. But it was really enjoyable having the contrast between the two of them, a bit like we were saying in The Lamplighters, having the land and the land life and the lighthouse life. I like that contrast as a writer, and I like scratching the surface of memory, because memory is more than one thing. We don't ever remember something completely accurately, and other people's perspectives come into it. And yeah, that was a really interesting challenge for me in asking the question, who is innocent here and who has committed a crime? I think I shy away in my present day strands. I shy away from setting it now. And the reason for that, I've come to realize, is technology. I find technology to be quite a big problem in plotting. And I've spoken with other authors about this, and they agree, because so much now can be solved through so in the sense of The Sunshine Man, surveillance. Birdie couldn't just quit her life and go off grid as easily now as she could in 1989. In 1989, she doesn't have a mobile phone. She can't Google his name. She can't, there's so much she could find out in a very boring way in terms of a reader's experience through using a phone. And I didn't want that. So I wanted to take us back to 89, which weirdly enough and quite worryingly classifies my book as historical fiction. Apparently, it's 1989, which is a sobering thought. But then that meant with the timeline, I needed to go back to Birdie being born in the late 40s and then having their childhoods play out through the 50s and early 60s. And that works well for me. You know, I'm really comfortable with that period. There's something that I just really love about it, the music and the sort of the culture and what people were eating and drinking and watching on the TV and the Queen's coronation and all of that. I find that really evocative and a nice writing space to be in. So the time frame worked out well. On Birdie's side of things, it's her grandmother, Gamma, who I really like. She is the shining light in the book, really. It's quite a dark book in many ways. But Gamma, this woman who takes in Birdie because Birdie's mother can't look after her, and then takes in Birdie's sister as well. And then actually goes on to take in Jimmy Maguire later on because he comes from such a difficult family background. Gamma is this embodiment of goodness and of believing in somebody and believing that somebody can be more than where they've come from. And I love that. And I think she's a really great character. And on Jimmy's side of things, he has this horrendous brother. I mean, none of his brothers are particularly great. Kip, his eldest brother, is the one who cares about him. But he has this really horrendous brother who was a lot of fun to write, actually, called Ron. And Jimmy and his daughter Donna go to visit him after he's come out of prison. And I didn't mean, it's interesting what you say about supporting cast, sometimes stealing the show, because I didn't really mean Ron to have more than a walk-on part. But he just commanded this whole chapter and is such an unpleasant person, but helped to really underline the disadvantages that Jimmy had suffered in childhood, and to hopefully invite the reader into, if not sympathizing, then understanding in part how he got to the point he got to in his life. What surprised me, I mean, my hope with writing this book was that I could invite the reader to feel sympathy for a character who has seemingly done something horrendous. And over the course of the novel, I felt my own allegiances shift slightly. At the beginning of the book, we really are on Birdie's side, if we're looking at it from the point of view of sides. She states her situation, and it seems a really clear-cut case of right and wrong, good and evil. And I think for her, I think we identify with her, even though her mission is radical, even though it's a kind of crazy thing to do. We really sympathize a lot with her. But then as Jimmy comes in, it starts to change. And for me, by the end of the novel, I was actually feeling more for him. So to answer your question about what it's like to live with a character like that, I became really fond of him, actually. I did become fond of him. And because Birdie tells us at the beginning of the book that she shot a man clean through the head, the reader and I was even starting to worry about, I'm not sure I want her to do that anymore. I'm not sure that that's the right outcome, but we know it is going to be the outcome. So that was a really interesting thing to play with. In a way, that first line of the book, it contains the whole plot and just loads the novel from that explosive beginning. And I think for Jimmy getting out of prison, that was really enjoyable to write because I read a lot about men coming out of prison, and I've been to visit men in prison. And one of the themes that keeps coming up is that once let out, you would imagine that it would be wonderful. They'd be free, they'd be able to live their lives. And more often than not, it's not like that, because the world is overwhelming. The world has changed. It's moved on without them. They're not, after a long period of time in prison, they're not always very well equipped to get their lives together, to break habits of crime, to break connections from people who can very quickly pull them back into that bad situation. And that's why the reoffending rate in the UK is so high, because these men just aren't given the tools or don't acquire the tools to survive on the outside. So when Jimmy walks free and we see him on page 69 coming out of prison, he is overwhelmed and panicked by the whole experience. And so the novel sort of raises questions about what freedom means in that way.